Number 12? Number 12. Okay, so delegations of authority and control over bank accounts, and I believe that our city treasurer is going to be giving the presentation.
Oh, I'm glad it's on, please. Can you hear me?
Nope.
No.
Can you hear me now?
No.
No. You have to put it on.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Well, now I have a truly riveting topic to cover. Internal controls over cash and banking. Exciting stuff. Way more exciting than trees. Sorry, Carl. Actually, I'm really proud to report that this item actually edged out a couple of others, much less exciting for space on tonight's agenda. The first was a request from NASCAR to hold a big event in 2007 at the Malaga Cove Roundabout and Raceway. The second was a request from Paul Stanley, who lives somewhere up here on the hill, to hold a KISS revival concert at La Venta Inn next summer. Can't wait to see both these items on a future agenda. Exciting stuff. Now down to the meat of this. Next slide, please. Agenda. We are going to try to move through this as quickly as possible. I have been warned that if anybody on the dais goes to sleep, I'm dead. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are internal controls. This is part of my mission to try to educate particularly our public, but also the folks who may not be financial experts in the room who are on this side of the barrier, especially Tony. We're going to talk about the current state of our banking controls and then what we have recommended as a future state. And there's been a lot of discussion about this between Mark and Stephen and I, and I think we have it right, but this is, up for discussion, and I'm happy to elucidate, as I'm sure my colleagues will be. And then we're going to talk about some other control recommendations that I would suggest that Council consider as we move forward. Next slide. Okay, AICPA, nice, simple, brief definition of internal control. With all due respect to our city attorney, my profession is second only to yours in being able to take a pretty straightforward idea and obfuscate it until it's clear as mud. But if we look at the next version of this, on the next slide, there are a couple of things that I'd like to have you look at, highlighted in yellow, that really are things to remember. And one is internal controls are a process. I like to think of it more as a system than a process because it's really a group of processes. It consists of policies, procedures, system access controls, a number of other things, but it's not one item. Also, the objectives are really reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of operations, and all of these are related, and they're all things that are basically objectives of any organization, but certainly our city. Compliance with laws and safeguarding our assets against any unauthorized acquisition, use, or disposal. Next page, to kind of sum it up. Oh, we'll leave that one till later. Next slide. Forward. Yes, so essentially internal controls. Why do we do it? Safeguarding the city's assets, which is primarily the objective of banking controls, which are also part of making sure we have reliable, timely, and accurate financial reporting. Complying with laws and regulations is another objective, and efficiency and effectiveness of operations is another objective. But the first two really are where the banking and cash controls lie. Who's responsible for this? The governing body, obviously Council, oversees this, guides us, and reviews the status of internal controls. It's up to management, city staff, and other personnel, i.e. me, to make sure the controls are well designed, they're in place, they're operating effectively. And lastly, what? These are kind of sub-objectives of internal controls, things that you really need to have to make sure you have a good internal control system. Number one is clearly delineated authorizations and responsibilities. Who can do what and who's accountable for it? Well-defined, well-designed, well-documented, and well-communicated policies and procedures. And that's something that most organizations struggle with. It's a continuous improvement issue. Certainly our city, we know we need to beef up some of that here, but that's not an unusual issue. But the other thing is limited access to systems and assets. A great example of this is if you have your inventory in a warehouse, you don't have an open door. I mean, there are key cards for authorized personnel to get into and out of your Amazon warehouse, for example. In a banking context, access to systems and assets means your ability to get control of the cash. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. And something I like to call the 4 eyes principle, otherwise known as segregation of duties. It's always good if you have more than one person involved in something. You know, one pair of eyes to do the job, another pair of eyes to review it. I make mistakes. I know Stephen probably doesn't, but we all make mistakes, and it's great. I always used to have my staff look at my work before I sent it to my boss or the board or the management team. Even though I have a CPA, it doesn't mean I'm perfect. Sorry, David. And then an ongoing requirement of internal controls is effective enforcement and monitoring. You can't just stick them in a drawer, put them on a list, and say, okay, we're done. You need to come back and evaluate them. Are they still current? Are they still operating effectively? So it's an ongoing process. Next slide. Types of internal controls. I'm not going to belabor this too much, but essentially overall controls break it down into 2 pieces. One is entity level controls. Those are controls that are pervasive. They kind of start at the top with council. And the activity level controls are really the day-to-day physical stuff that needs to happen to execute transactions within the internal control framework that's been established. So examples of entity level controls I've listed above. Delegations of authority is what we're talking about today. There are a number of others. Fraud prevention certainly touches on the banking and cash controls, IT security processes. Tone at the top, I'd like to maybe take a second for that. That's really the example that's set by the leadership of an organization, including the governing body, but also the management, the people sitting at this counter here, including you, Tony.
Thank you.
The tone that we set and the ethics that we demonstrate in our day-to-day interactions with the city, with the residents, with each other, that really tells other people how to behave. People, lower-level employees, it may extend to our contractors, so setting that example is really important. Next slide. I'm going to go through these in less detail, but essentially there are 2 kinds of controls in terms of the way they operate. One is to prevent a problem, and the second one is to find a problem before it's too late. So preventive or detective. Obviously, preventive is always better than detective, but sometimes you can't construct something to prevent everything that goes wrong. And then there are manual controls that rely on human action and automated controls that rely on IT systems. Both of these are important, and at first face value, you might say, oh, automated controls are the best because they're repetitive, they're consistent, they're not dependent on human error, but you really need both. A little example of this is, I used to travel all over the world, keeping the world safe for capitalism, but I remember being at this German entity that had SAP as their standard IT system, and I talked to the young woman who was responsible for reconciling inventory, and she told me in a very Germanic way that, I don't have to reconcile inventory. SAP does it for me. And then I showed her how SAP does not allow out-of-balance entries. So it will make up the difference and make sure that your debits and your credits always equal. It's very German. So you have to look at that variance and figure out what's in that. So you need the human and you need the machine, but together they work great. Next slide. Okay, a couple things I really wanted to stress here. One, trust is not an internal control. Your internal controls are designed without consideration of who it is sitting in that seat. You absolutely do your best to make sure you've got the best people who are skilled, who understand their roles and responsibilities, and that they receive the training and supervision they need. But you can't base an internal control system on trusting a person. A great example, and this is somewhat local, and most of you have probably read about this, but a couple of years ago, the principal of St. James School in Redondo Beach, who was a nun, very highly regarded nun, left. And right after she left, I guess somebody came in and looked at the books, and she had absconded with about $400,000 of the school's money. Sister Mary embezzlement. And it turns out she had a gambling habit. Who knew? This is exciting stuff, I'm telling you guys. So it's not, internal control system is not a reflection of what you think about a person's integrity. Good internal control systems protect good employees as well as the organization. So keep that in mind. It's not like we think you're bad, so we need to do this extra check. This is good for both of us. Competence is an internal control. As someone who started life as an auditor and did a lot of auditing during my career, one of the first things you do in evaluating your audit approach is to evaluate your internal control environment. And a big part of that is who is in that role? Do you have people with enough skills, the right skills, and do you have enough people? You need a little redundancy in an organization, and I think, given the risks, the offset of, saving $20,000 versus potentially losing $2 million, I mean, those are decisions that, you just don't want to cut so close to the bone that no one can go on vacation. One of the internal controls always used to be, years ago, that everybody, especially I think it's still true at banks, Victoria, everybody had to go on a vacation for at least 2 weeks.
Not anymore.
Yeah, it used to be, because they wanted to make sure someone else came in and did your job for a couple weeks and kind of took a look at things. So you do need, and then people, people are not machines. They need a break, and, you need to make sure people do have somebody to back them up if they go on vacation or they're sick or if they decide to move on to another opportunity. So I think the other thing has to do with this concept of reasonable assurance that was in that definition of internal control. And reasonable assurance means it's not absolute 99, 44, 100% sure. There is no internal control system that can provide absolute assurance. Reasonable is considered that is unlikely that there will be a misstatement that's not, a material misstatement that's not prevented or identified after the fact. So reasonable assurance. And one of the things I like to talk about when I talk about reasonable assurance is the fraud triangle. I won't go into a lot of detail, but there are 3 things necessary for fraud to happen. One is motive. Somebody, needs the money. 2 is opportunity, which is the ability to take the money. And the third is rationalization, someone who says, well, I needed to do this because my child is dying and I can't afford her medication, you know, whatever that rationalization is. We can't eliminate the motive and the rationalization, but we can mitigate and minimize the opportunity. So that's what internal controls aim to do. Next slide. It's exciting stuff, right? Material weaknesses. Wanted to mention that, you know, as part of, we get an what they call a SAS 114, 115 letter. When auditors start their work, they have to do some evaluation of your internal controls in order to determine how much work they need to do. Do they have to do more extensive testing? Or is your internal control system pretty robust so they can minimize their testing? Another good reason to have good internal controls, your audit fees will go down. But this year, not this year, last year's audit for June 2021, they did find a couple of material weaknesses in this particular area. One is failure to complete bank accounts on a timely basis, and the second was what we call segregation of duties, failure to make sure you've got those 4 I's, that you've got a separation of the people who execute the transactions from the people who book the transactions. So those were 2 things they identified, and again, I don't want this to be an opportunity to beat people over the head. I love to do root cause analyses. I came from manufacturing operations background. And the root cause analysis here is pretty obvious. We had a significant turnover in all of these positions. City manager, finance director, treasurer turned over a couple of times. So there were different people in these roles, and you lost a lot of institutional knowledge in the gaps. There were times when certainly finance director and city manager positions were vacant, or they were held by people who were temporary and not necessarily expert city managers, but helping us out. So these things happen when you don't have enough experienced people who know their jobs and who understand the organization in place. And lack of staffing, lack of bandwidth is another cause. So before we, take anybody present to task, I'd like to make sure we remember that. Next page. Okay, another one of these dense definition of control weaknesses. Next slide. Briefly, 2 kinds of weaknesses. Control is designed incorrectly or it's operating incorrectly. And that's not critically important to understand, but what is important is controls don't operate correctly if the people performing them don't have the skill sets, knowledge, competence, and authority to perform the control. And one of the things I like to think about here is it's not a good idea to have someone who is subordinate to another person who is part of the control. It depends on the level, but certainly, for example, hourly staff, they may not feel as if they're in a position to object if their boss tells them to do something, whereas they might have a little more comfort telling someone who's one step removed, who doesn't control their income and their continued employment. So you need to be a little bit careful there. It doesn't mean you can never do it, but you just need to be cautious. And you always need to be sure that the people who are performing the controls do understand what the control is all about and what they're doing. You don't want to assign the bank reconciliations to Anastasia any more than you want to assign tree inventory to me. Next page. Okay, material weaknesses. This is basically the 2 types of deficiencies that have been defined by the people who define these things, the PCAOB and the AICPA. I like to think of this, I was brought up as I'm an Irish Catholic from Boston, so this is like a mortal sin and a venial sin. A material weakness, you better clean it up fast, because if you die when that's still a problem, you know where you're going. A significant deficiency is like a venial sin. It isn't good, you need to fix it, but it's unlikely to cause a severe problem. It's important enough to bring to the attention, the auditors find it, they need to bring it to the attention of senior management and council, but if a material weakness is really an indication of something that needs to be fixed forthwith. I can say that the bank reconciliations, people are on that. I know that, we're doing a much better job there. This topic that we're discussing tonight is the other piece of that, and it's really important, I think, that we get some decisions on that. So next page. Segregation of duties. So the material control issue, one of them is the bank recs, I talked about that. The other is segregation of duties, and that's really essentially what we're talking about with these banking controls. It's who can execute a transaction involving cash, whether that be check, ACH, wire transfer, direct debit, you're setting up a vendor on direct debit, anything that results in cash flowing out of the organization. So you always want two people involved in those transactions. One, and you need to make sure that you segregate the people who do the recording, the bookkeeping for that, from the people who actually physically execute the transactions. As much as you can, you need those to be Chinese wall. Next slide. So here's the situation we currently have. And again, I'd like to make sure that people understand this reflects a lot of turnover, a lot of staff, changing responsibilities. City manager left. We had a senior accountant, temporary person who was in place for a long time, left. People are coming up to speed, and learning, but we really had some gaps there. And so here's what we were left with. The former city manager was the bank contracting officer. When Victoria was treasurer, she was the contracting officer with the bank. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. After Victoria moved on, there was another treasurer, but she was never made the contracting officer. It became the finance director. The finance director left, and then somehow it became the city manager. And then the temporary city manager, Ken Rugavina, left, and it was turned over to Laura. Again, I don't think there was a lot of thought. I think these things were probably done in a hurry to make sure that somebody covered the base. So currently, the check signers, we still have the former mayor and I are currently signing all checks. Previously, we had 3 signers, and I've never seen that, but we had the city manager signing, we had 2 other people signing. Currently, the people who can sign are Michael, myself, the former city manager, and Stephen. Stephen never signs checks, but he is on the authorization list. Interbank EFTs. EFT stands for electronic funds transfer, and it's under that heading, all transactions that are not by check fall. So wire transfers, any ACH transaction, PayPal, automatic debit, those are all electronic funds transfers. And those are, they can both be stronger controls and weaker controls depending on the access rights that you give to people in the system where those transfers take place. So you have people who initiate and people who approve. The good thing about the online banking system is you have to have two people. The system is set up so one person can't do it. Unlike a check, where if one person signs a check, as long as it's somebody on the bank's list, they're not going to look for a second signature, let alone a third. You know, your internal controls are your problem. That's internal controls. The bank can't be responsible for that. So what gets tricky is who can change the authorization rights in that online banking system. Because if you have the ability to do that, you can change who the initiators are, you can change who the approvers are. You pretty much have the keys to the kingdom. Under the way the bank structures this, the bank contracting officer has all those abilities. They can change, make modifications to user access rights. They can add themselves as an approver. They can add anybody they want as an initiator. So that situation per se is not a good situation. We need, and I'll talk about what we want to do about that. In terms of checks, the big issues with checks are access to the check stock and access to make journal entries in the ERP system. If you don't have access to the check stock and you don't have access to the ERP system, you pretty much are good to sign checks. I mean, you can't sign a check and then go in and cover the traces by making a journal entry that says office supplies. And so there's a little less concern that way about checks. Obviously, checks are used less and less. We use way more than most organizations, and I think we're going to try to get an ERP system that drags us into the 20th century at least. But right now we mostly use checks, but we do use quite a bit of EFT transfers also. So that's where we are today. Let's fast forward to where we'd like to be, and this is what I'd like council to think about and make decisions about. So here are the recommended controls. I'd like to revert back to where we were when Victoria was treasurer, where the bank contracting officer is the city treasurer. It actually says that in the investment policy. And again, this isn't something I am not looking for power and authority. But the good point about this is I don't have access to the ERP system. I don't have access to the check stock. I don't even have physical access to this building. So in the event I could sneak in and the safe was open and I could sneak a check out, it's just unlikely to happen. The issue becomes the modifications to the online banking system. And because of that, I'm recommending that we have two people. That's an incorrect, it's not the former city manager and the city support services director. That's what we have now. I'm recommending that I and at least one other person, if not two, whether it's the mayor or the mayor pro tem or the city manager, that two people need to make any modification. So I could enter it, but I would need someone else to approve it. So I could not single-handedly go into the ERP system and the banking online system and say, I'm going to set up, the janitor as my initiator, and then I'm going to wire $10 million out as the approver. It would have to be approved by the two people who have web administrator access. And that would be me and whomever the council feels is appropriate. And it can be more than one person, like check signers. Currently, the way we had set it up was the mayor, mayor pro tem, the treasurer, and I think I'd like to add the city manager, and there have to be 2 signers on the checks. For the adds, deletes, and user mods, again, I'd like it to be the treasurer, and I would suggest it's the same people as the check signers, because it's basically the same type of it actually is even more powerful. And then in terms of who the initiators are, currently we have the finance analysts as the initiators. I think we'd probably like to add Stephen to that. And then the new management analyst, whose name is Mark? Kia. And then the people who have to approve the transactions, all of them external to the city, the mayor pro tem, or the city treasurer. Those are typically the EFTs. They're typically large amounts. We're recommending that anything greater than 5 million actually has 2 approvers. That can be done in the system. I checked with the bank. And if all of this sounds cumbersome, it's not meant to be bureaucratic. In point of fact, rarely do we need to make modifications in users. That happens when people leave, when they change responsibilities. It doesn't happen every day. In terms of large transactions over 5 million, I think those are mostly transactions I make by moving investments from LAIF or LA County to purchase securities, and I've never made one more than 5 million. I put 9 million once into LA County, but I think those should require 2 approvers. But anything less than 5 million, I think, those are, when we get property taxes and we get a ton of money, and we want to be able to move that pretty quickly over to LAIF or LA County to earn a little bit of interest. So that's what I'm recommending in terms of the bank authorizations. Let's maybe move down, unless there are any questions. I know this is exciting stuff.
Well, we're going to want, and it's been a long time, and we still have another agenda item. So I think the last slide is where our decision points are, right? So,
well, it's really that prior slide.
Yeah.
Mayor Losey, again, this is what we need you to focus on and make decisions about. And please keep in mind that, on the adds and deletes, somehow that I didn't edit it correctly.
Right. That's basically the system administrator for the online system, right?
System administrator for the online system, and we're recommending 2 people. It requires 2 people to make any of those changes.
Okay. So, just point of clarification, when I was the city treasurer, I was not the contracting officer, but I was one of the system administrators. So that's backwards.
Well, I actually got the documents from the bank.
Well, I eventually, there were some people who left, and for a brief moment in time, I was the contracting officer, but I flipped that back to the city manager as soon as I could, because I just thought that was...
Which, Tony? Because Tony Dollarberg was never the contracting officer.
Okay. Well, anyway, so I would say that the, under check signers, we can say that, we want to have 2, but if you say there that at least 2 are required, one of them has to be the city manager. It can't be 2 elected people. My concern there is there's too many elected people on that list, and it needs to be a staff person. Okay. So I think it can be the city manager plus one other. What
if the city manager is out, though, Victoria?
Well, we're a thin staff, and maybe, and that's when you have a backup plan, but I think that's a mistake. I think
let me ask why.
I thought in your comments you said you wanted to add yourself as a system administrator?
Yes.
As a third? Yeah.
2 people.
Now you've got the king's...
No, because we have to set the system up so that there are 2... If I go in and I change somebody's authorization rights, it goes to the second administrator. And again, as I said, this happens so rarely.
So and then an EFT approver and a check signer is kind of the same thing?
Yeah,
So,
and currently, what's been approved by council, just so you know, the 4 that are listed, except for the city manager, right now, the council has approved the mayor pro tem, and the treasurer as the 3 signers. That's what we have.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say that I think that we made that change when I was the mayor pro tem, and I never did update the signatures. So the mayor pro tem is not actually an authorized signer because we never updated.
No, that actually did get done.
No,
I went back and
never did.
looked.
When I was mayor pro tem, I never was added as an authorized signer. So, but
Who
on
was-
the EFT
okay.
approvers, then you have to at least have the city manager's got to be an approver on the EFT. And then I don't know why we would have the management analyst. The management analyst.
That's an initiator.
And we have a difference between the slide here and the report.
And the staff report.
Yeah,
So-
the staff reports also, that one, we knew that didn't get edited correctly, yeah.
Well, the staff report doesn't have
I think the
staff
staff report is accurate based on our conversation, right? So the initiators we talked about were the analysts in the city that would initiate transactions rather than the director.
But he could,
Well, no,
In the
because we want
event-
him to be an approver, don't we?
no, for the reasons that I discussed. He has access to the ERP system,
But the report,
responsible for making journal entries.
the staff report says he's an approver.
Yeah.
But he,
It's
I know, but the
7.
staff report is, there were lots of edits that happened at the last minute, and some of them didn't come through, and I apologize for that. So,
And the online banking system isn't even in the staff report.
Right.
right.
Can I make a
Go ahead, sorry.
Can I make a recommendation that we request that the city manager and the treasurer sit down and try to come back to the council at the next meeting with a recommendation that we can all crisply understand and approve?
I think it would be good, though, if council at least provided a little
comment.
bit of comments and
Yeah.
direction that they could incorporate.
I think that's a good suggestion, David.
Yeah, well, okay, I think yes, the council, I don't have any problem providing input, but this is an internal control situation that we have a limited size staff, and just about everything that Kate has articulated is of concern from an internal control perspective, from my perspective. But I think we're, right now, to expedite this process, I think if Mark and Kate were to caucus and they can share their recommendations with us as in the next staff report as to how we want to proceed. If one of the council members wants to provide additional input into it, so be it.
And I'm fine with that.
It's not going to be very different from this.
I'm sorry?
The recommendations are not going to differ very much from this.
No, I appreciate that.
The exception of the adds,
I threw a
deletes.
couple
Yeah.
comments out there. Don, why don't you
And I'm nervous about people aside, so I'm just thinking positionally.
Right, it's not.
I'm nervous about having a city treasurer as the bank contracting officer, because as I look at this, that's probably one of the most powerful positions. And we don't really know who future treasurers are going to be. We've been lucky with the last few, but it's not a highly sought office. You don't know who's going to run. We were so lucky that you ran it, and, there were questions about who else might run that might not have the skill set or the experience, and so that makes me nervous to put such an important
I agree, Dawn, and that's why we are putting in the additional safeguard that this person is the contracting officer, but because he or she can't make a change in the online system without a second person approving it, can't single-handedly release an electronic transfer, and doesn't have access to check stock, and doesn't have access to make entries in the ERP system, you pretty much buttoned it up that way. I mean, I thought a lot about
That's
this.
not really what a contracting officer does.
I also, at the CMTA, I did a, not statistically significant, but an informal poll of elected treasurers, and they're all the bank contracting officer. You were, Victoria.
Oh, I might.
I have the
You might be
document,
right.
I have the documentation.
Again, I'm
And
going
it does say in the investment policy that the treasurer shall be the banking officer.
No, well, it says you're responsible for banking relationships. I don't think.
No, it doesn't say, no, it says,
Okay, so.
I go back, excuse me, I'd like to go back and really request that Kate and Mark work this thing out, because I think one of the things that Kate is suggesting, which I 100% agree with, is having thought through all the various combinations and potential situations that can arise. That's how you prevent internal control weaknesses. And I think that Kate brings that skill set to the table, and I think if she and Mark and Stephen can sit down and brainstorm, I think we can come up with a solution that is effective for this community.
I actually think that this report and presentation is the result of that, is it not?
Well, I think-
The report was, the presentation differs slightly from the
Okay,
report.
because this is more, well,
the report does not have this articulated because we were, as I said, we were editing quickly and there were some things that got missed.
It's not ready for a resolution for the council.
Yeah, but this, essentially, we'll sit down, Mark and Stephen and I can sit down and, take one more look at this, but this is essentially what you're going to get.
What would be
I would
helpful for
think.
me to understand is, in particular with Mark's experience, is to hear you say in a combined solution back to us, we didn't invent this wheel. We've looked at 5 other cities. This is a best practice. Personal opinions don't particularly matter because in the industry, specifically in small municipalities with small numbers of staff, we've looked at 5 cities, all 5 are equal, and this is how it's done. Let's match and find the best practice and let's get in line and let's do it.
Well, we did some of that, Michael. Unfortunately, you have a lot of small cities who have pretty bad internal control weaknesses.
Okay, so then to take the next step, if that's the case, I'm hearing a little bit of opinion and argument relative to the selection of the bank contracting officer. I think we need to remove ourselves as individuals out of the equation and who's in these offices and or staff assignments completely.
That I can get, and
Okay.
I can document that is
And it would-
normally the elected treasurer, where the treasurer is elected.
And here's a list of the
Cities that do it that.
cities that do it that way, and we'll get behind you. I assume we'll get behind you and follow through.
But whoever, and again, trust me, my ego will not be crushed if I'm not the contracting officer. Whoever has that role, you need to put these other mitigating controls in place, because the way the bank has structured this, that person has got authority.
I need to make one other suggestion without hurting any feelings, and that is the fact that we pay the treasurer some ridiculous amount of money that gets attributed to PERS, puts the treasurer into the PERS system, tracks it, and then pays somebody in a retirement, I say this to be funny, I don't know the number, 5 cents a week.
15 million. Where's Tony?
Oh, come on.
15 million.
No, stop.
Okay.
I'm actually really being serious. I think this is a waste of time, effort, and money. And I'm not sure why the city originally did it, and I'm not sure that there's value in doing it. So when we're looking at this, I think the same discussion is, how are the functions performing in these individual capacities? What do other cities do? And let's address this one at the same time.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying this is a waste of time?
No. I'm saying this is absolutely not a waste of time, and I'm adding something to it. And what I'm suggesting that we add to it is none of the city council members are paid. Wonderful. By the way, I'd like an exponential raise. Beyond that, the city treasurer does receive a very small, minuscule payment that almost doesn't make it worth it. And what I'm suggesting, I'm taking your money away is what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that we look at that and understand why that is, because that gets attributed to PERS. and put into PERS and tracked. It's just one more bookkeeping effort that potentially could be simplified, and I'm not sure that it's necessary. That's all.
Okay, so I
think
think,
that's-
Mark, do you feel like you got some direction here on what we're after? Because I think we're going in circles, and we need to take a little break, and we need to move on
That should
to
be
our
a
next
different
item.
topic for a different agenda,
Yeah.
perhaps.
And this was intended to be a policy direction. It would be appropriate to receive public comment on the item.
Is there any public comment? Sorry. Did you send me a card? I didn't see it, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I can make one out if you want to. Can you go back to the existing recommended, existing authorizations paid currently? So the current banking contracting officer is Laura Guglielmo? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
But she has no ability to do anything because she has no access to systems, no access, physical access to the building, no access to check stop. So, I mean, she's on the sheet, but she can't do any of the